Onan at my husband's funeral. The woman everyone believed was his mistress walked straight up to me, pressed a small brass key into my palm, and whispered, "Ethan did not betray you. He died trying to protect you from your own family." Then she disappeared into the rain before I could ask her what she meant. For 3 months before Ethan died, I had believed the worst about him. He came home late. He guarded his phone. He took calls in the garage and lowered his voice whenever I entered the room. Twice, I smelled a perfume on his coat that I did not own. It was sweet and sharp, like oranges and smoke. When I confronted him, he never gave me a clean answer. He would only say, "Nora, I need a little more time." Time for what? He refused to explain. Then I found a hotel receipt in his jacket pocket. 1 room, 2 breakfasts. A woman's name written on the back in blue ink. Claire Reynolds. I did not scream. I did not throw his clothes into the street. I simply placed the receipt on our kitchen table and waited for him to come home. When Ethan saw it, all the color left his face. I asked him whether he loved her. He looked at me for a long moment and said, "I love you more than you understand." That answer hurt more than a confession. The next morning, he packed a small bag and moved into an apartment near downtown Richmond. He said the separation was temporary. I told him not to come back until he could tell me the truth. 4 weeks later, his car went through a guardrail on a wet road outside the city. The police called it an accident. At the funeral, my mother sat beside me with one hand resting on my knee. My younger brother, Grant, stood near the front of the chapel and accepted condolences, as if he were the grieving husband instead of me. Grant had always been good at looking important. Even as a boy, he could walk into a room and make people believe he belonged at the center of it. After our father died, Grant became president of Bennett Medical Supply, the company Dad had built from 1 delivery van and a rented warehouse. I inherited 40% of the voting shares. Grant inherited 40%. My mother controlled the remaining 20%. I had never wanted to run the company. I was an interior designer. I loved old houses, natural light, and the quiet satisfaction of making broken spaces feel whole again. Ethan was different. He understood numbers. He had worked as the company's chief financial officer for 8 years. Dad trusted him. I trusted him too, until the hotel receipt. After the service, people gathered beneath black umbrellas in the cemetery. Rain slid down the polished wood of Ethan's coffin. I stood there feeling empty, angry, and ashamed that part of me was still wondering whether Claire Reynolds would appear. Then she did. She wore a dark red coat and no umbrella. She was in her early 40s, with wet brown hair tucked behind her ears. I recognized her from a photograph I had found on Ethan's phone. In the picture, she and Ethan were sitting across from each other in a restaurant booth. His hand was resting over hers. I stepped toward her before she could reach me. I said, "You should leave." She glanced past me at my brother and mother. Then she took my hand, folded my fingers around the key, and whispered the words that changed everything. "Ethan did not betray you. He died trying to protect you from your own family." Before I could respond, Grant called my name. Claire turned and walked between the headstones. A black sedan was waiting near the cemetery gate. She got inside, and it drove away. Grant came up behind me. He asked who she was. I closed my fist around the key and said, "No one." That was my first lie to my brother. It would not be my last. That night, my mother insisted on staying at my house. She made tea I did not drink and spoke softly about grief. Around 9, Gran arrived carrying a leather folder. He said there were business matters that could not wait. Ethan's death had left the company without a chief financial officer. According to Grant, several banks were nervous. A large hospital contract was under review. He wanted me to sign a temporary voting agreement, giving him control of my shares for 6 months. I stared at the document. My husband had been buried less than 7 hours earlier, and my brother was already asking me to surrender control of the company. Grant gave me the smile he used with difficult clients. He said, "This is about stability, Nora. You do not need more pressure right now." My mother squeezed my hand. She said, "Let Grant handle it. Your father would have wanted the company protected." I almost signed. Then I felt the brass key in my pocket. I told him I was too tired to read legal papers. Grant's smile disappeared for half a second. Then it returned. He said he understood and left the folder on my kitchen counter. After they went to bed, I searched the key. There was a number stamped near the top. A small metal tag read River City Storage, Unit 314. At midnight, I put on jeans, took Ethan's old flashlight from the garage, and drove across town. River City Storage sat behind a chain link fence near the freight yards. The office was closed, but the gate accepted a 6-digit code etched onto the back of the key tag. Unit 314 was at the end of a long concrete hallway. My hands shook as I unlocked it. Inside, there was no furniture, no boxes of clothes, no hidden gifts for another woman. There was a folding table, a laptop, 3 banker's boxes, a voice recorder, and a framed photograph of Ethan and me on our wedding day. On top of the first box was an envelope with my name on it. I opened it and found a letter written in Ethan's handwriting. "Nora, if you are reading this, I failed to come home and explain everything myself. I am sorry for the pain I caused you. Claire is not my lover. She is helping me investigate money that has been stolen from Bennett Medical Supply. The person stealing it is Grant. Do not trust him. Do not trust the company attorney. And until you know how deep this goes, do not trust your mother." My knees weakened. I sat on the cold floor and read the letter again. Then I heard a car door slam outside the building. Footsteps entered the hallway, slow footsteps, coming toward Unit 314. Part TW, I switched off the flashlight and held my breath. The footsteps stopped outside the unit next to mine. Metal scraped against metal. A lock opened. Someone moved around for less than a minute, then closed the door and walked away. I waited until I heard the outside door shut before I moved. My first instinct was to take everything. My second was to leave the room exactly as I had found it. If Ethan had hidden evidence there, he might have expected someone to look for it. I photographed every page I could, copied the laptop files onto 2 flash drives, and took only the letter and the voice recorder. The boxes were filled with invoices, wire records, and purchase orders. Bennett Medical Supply had paid millions to false companies with empty offices and abandoned addresses. Grant's signature appeared on several approvals. Ethan had marked the transfers in red and written, "Money returns through Halcyon Trust." I drove home before sunrise and hid the 2 flash drives in separate places. Then I listened to the voice recorder. The first file was Ethan speaking alone. His voice was tired. He said, "March 9th. Grant approved another payment to Meridian. $280,000. No services delivered. Reed says the board authorization is valid." But the signature page was added after Nora signed the annual resolution. Reed was Martin Reed, the company attorney. He had worked for my father for more than 20 years. He had attended every birthday party, every holiday dinner, and every important family meeting I could remember. The second recording contained 2 male voices. One was Ethan. The other was Grant. Grant said, "You are looking at numbers that are none of your business." Ethan answered, "They became my business when you used Nora's signature." Grant laughed. He said, "My sister signs whatever we put in front of her. She does not care about the company." Ethan's voice went cold. He said, She cares about being treated honestly. There was a pause. Then Grant said, "Be careful. You married into this family. That does not make you one of us." The recording ended. I sat at my kitchen table as morning light filled the room. For years, I had allowed Grant and Martin Reed to summarize company papers for me. They told me where to sign, and I signed. I told myself I was staying out of a business I did not understand. Now I wondered how many times my name had been used to approve a theft. At 8, my mother came downstairs and found me staring at Grant's voting agreement. She asked whether I had slept. I said no. She made coffee and said, I should remember the happy years and let Ethan's final months go. My mother had always preferred closed doors, lowered voices, and problems that disappeared before outsiders noticed them. I asked, "Did Ethan ever talk to you about Grant?" Her hand stopped above the sugar bowl, only for a second. Then she said, "They argued about business. Men do that." I asked what they argued about. She looked directly at me and said, "Ethan thought he was smarter than your brother." It was not an answer. Grant called 3 times. I ignored him. That afternoon, someone rang the doorbell. A delivery driver stood on my porch with a white box of flowers. The card read, "Thinking of you during this painful time." There was no name. Inside the box, beneath the roses, was a photograph. It showed me entering River City Storage at 12:47 that morning. On the back, someone had written, "Grief can make people curious. Curiosity can make them careless." I locked every door in the house. Then I called the number Claire had written at the bottom of Ethan's letter. She answered on the second ring. I said, "You have 10 seconds to tell me who you are." She said, "Not on the phone. Go somewhere public. Leave your car at home." I almost hung up. Then she added, "The man following you drives a gray Ford Explorer with a dent above the left rear wheel." I looked through my front window. A gray Explorer was parked halfway down the street. I closed the curtain. Claire told me to take a rideshare to the Jefferson Hotel and sit in the main lobby. 30 minutes later, she joined me near the tall marble columns. She looked different without the red coat. Plain black pants, gray sweater, no jewelry. I asked whether she worked for the police. She said no. She was a forensic accountant who had spent 12 years investigating corporate fraud. Ethan hired her privately after he discovered the false vendors. She helped him trace the money from Bennett Medical Supply into Halcyon Trust, then through several accounts controlled by Grant and Martin Reed. I asked about the hotel receipt. Claire's expression softened. She said, "They had met in a hotel conference suite because Ethan believed his office was being watched. The second breakfast had been for an investigator from the state attorney general's office." I asked why Ethan let me believe they were having an affair. Claire said, "He thought a broken marriage would keep me away from the company and make Grant stop seeing me as a threat." Anger rose through my grief. Ethan had tried to protect me with a lie and decided I could not handle the truth. Claire said, "He hated the pain it caused and planned to explain after turning over the evidence." I asked whether she believed his crash was an accident. She placed a folder on the table between us. Inside was a copy of a repair invoice from a garage outside Richmond. 3 days before Ethan died, someone had brought his car in for brake work. The customer name was false. The payment came from a credit card issued to Meridian Freight Solutions. Said the mechanic claimed he had only replaced a damaged line. Ethan's official accident report said the brake line had failed. I asked why the police had not connected it. She said the mechanic disappeared 2 days after the crash. My skin went cold. Claire leaned closer. She said Ethan had been scheduled to meet a federal prosecutor the morning after he died. He planned to provide the original company ledger, the one that showed how the false payments began. But the ledger was not in the storage unit. I asked where it was. Claire said, "Ethan believed your father hid it before he died. My father had died 18 months earlier, after a sudden stroke." I asked why Dad would hide a company ledger. Claire gave me the answer I was not ready to hear. "Because your father discovered Grant was stealing before Ethan did." That evening, I returned home through the back door. The house looked normal. Then I noticed a drawer in Ethan's desk was open. Nothing valuable had been taken. His watch was still there. So was cash in an envelope. Only one thing was missing: the photograph from our wedding that had been sitting on the desk. On the empty space beneath it, someone had left another message. "Sign the voting agreement, or the next funeral will be yours." Part 3. Fear did something unexpected to me. It made me calm. For most of my life, I had stepped around conflict. I softened my words. I let Grant speak first. I accepted my mother's belief that keeping peace was more important than being right. But someone had killed my husband, entered my home, and threatened my life. Peace was no longer available, so I decided to become exactly what my family believed I was: weak, distracted, grieving, easy to control. The next morning, I called Grant and apologized for avoiding him. I told him I had been confused and emotional. I said I wanted him to handle the company, just as he always had. His voice changed immediately. It became warm and protective. He said, "That is what family is for." I told him I would sign the voting agreement at the board meeting on Friday. He sounded relieved. Then I asked whether I could spend a few days at Dad's old lake house before the meeting. The house sat 2 hours west near Smith Mountain Lake. Dad had used it as a private retreat and sometimes as a place to review company records away from the office. Grant was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "There is nothing out there except old furniture." I said I wanted to feel close to Dad. He told me to be careful driving. That was how I knew he did not want me there. Before I left, Claire gave me a small recording device and a phone that could automatically upload audio to a secure server. She also arranged for a retired state investigator named Luis Ortega to stay nearby. Luis had worked with Ethan during the last month of the investigation. He was broad-shouldered, quiet, and careful with every word. He told me not to play hero. I said, "My husband played hero. Look where it got him." Luis did not argue. The lake house smelled like dust and pine. A hallway photograph showed Grant and me beside Dad's first delivery van. Grant smiled at the camera while I watched him. Dad had always called me the steady one and asked me to be patient with my brother. Over time, steady became another word for silent. I searched Dad's office first. The desk drawers were empty. The filing cabinet held only old tax returns and property records. I checked behind picture frames, beneath loose floorboards, and inside the hollow base of an antique globe. Nothing. At sunset, I found a scratch on the wooden panel beside the fireplace. The panel shifted when I pressed it. Behind it was a narrow steel safe. I tried birthdays, addresses, and the company's founding year. The safe remained locked. Then I remembered the first delivery van in the photograph. Dad called it Old Blue. Its license plate had been BMS 417. I entered 417. The safe opened. Inside was the original company ledger, a sealed envelope addressed to me, and a small bottle of heart medication with my father's name on it. The ledger showed the first false payment had been made almost 6 years earlier. At first, the amounts were small. $20,000, $30,000. Then they grew. Beside one payment, Dad had written, "Grant says this is temporary. Reed says it can be corrected." I do not believe either of them. The envelope contained a letter. Dad wrote that he had confronted Grant and Martin Reed about the missing money. Grant begged for time. He claimed he had made poor investments and used company funds to cover losses. He promised to repay everything. My mother asked Dad not to involve the police. She said an arrest would destroy the family and ruin the company. Dad agreed to wait 30 days. During that time, he suffered the stroke that killed him. The last line of the letter read, "If anything happens to me, give this ledger to Nora." Grant loves power. Nora understands responsibility. I read the sentence 3 times. Then I examined the medication bottle. The label said it contained a blood thinner Dad had taken for years. But the pills inside were a different shape from the ones I remembered filling into his weekly organizer. I photographed them and sent the image to Claire. She called 5 minutes later. She said the pills appeared to be a high-dose clotting medication used in emergency treatment, not a blood thinner. I sat on the floor beside the open safe. My father's stroke might not have been natural. At 9 that night, headlights swept across the front windows. A car stopped outside. I texted Louise, who was parked half a mile away. Then I turned on the recorder and placed it beneath a bowl on the kitchen table. My mother entered without knocking. She still had a key. She looked exhausted. Her hair was damp from the mist. And she wore the same cream-colored coat she had worn at Ethan's funeral. She asked why I had come to the lake house. I told her I had found Dad's safe. Her face changed, not surprise, fear. I placed the ledger on the table. I asked how long she had known. She closed her eyes. Then she said, "Your father was going to send Grant to prison." I asked whether Grant changed Dad's medication. She said no too quickly. I repeated the question. She began to cry. She told me Grant had come to her the night before Dad's stroke. He said Dad was destroying the family over money that could be repaid. He asked where Dad kept his medicine. My mother showed him. She claimed she did not know he intended to switch the pills. The next morning, she saw a different bottle near Dad's coffee cup. She understood what Grant had done, but Dad had already collapsed. I felt as if the room had tilted. I asked why she stayed silent. She said, "He is my son." I said, "I am your daughter." She looked at me with a grief so deep it almost pulled me toward her. Then she said the words that ended whatever remained between us. "You were always stronger. I knew you would survive." She had protected Grant because he was weak and sacrificed me because I was strong. I asked whether she knew Grant had threatened me. She shook her head. I asked whether she knew what happened to Ethan. She would not answer. Before I could press her, the kitchen window shattered. A bullet struck the wall above my head. My mother screamed. I dropped to the floor and pulled her down with me. Outside, an engine roared. Louise arrived less than a minute later, but the shooter was gone. The bullet had missed us both. That was when I understood something. The shot had not been meant to kill me. It had been meant to frighten my mother into silence. Someone knew she was at the lake house. Only 3 people knew she still had a key. My mother, Grant, and Martin Reed. Par FUR, the police searched the property and found tire marks near the road. No shell casing. No clear footprints. My mother gave a statement. But she left out everything about Grant, the medication, and the ledger. When the officers were gone, I told her she had one final chance. She could help me tell the truth, or she could stand beside Grant when the truth destroyed him. She whispered, "You do not understand what he will do," I said. "I understand exactly what he has already done." She left before dawn. Louise wanted me moved to a safe location. Instead, I asked him to help me set a trap. I called Grant and told him someone had fired into the lake house. I cried just enough to make my voice shake. I said I could not handle any more fear. I said I had found old records but had burned them in the fireplace because I wanted the past to stay buried. Grant asked what records. I told him I had not read them closely. He was silent for several seconds. Then he said I had done the right thing. I said I wanted to sign more than the temporary voting agreement. I wanted to sell him my shares and leave Virginia. He tried to hide his excitement. He said, "We could discuss a fair price at Friday's board meeting." I said no. I wanted to meet first at Dad's old warehouse, the place where the company began. I told him it felt right to end my connection to the business there. He agreed. Claire and Louise prepared the warehouse with hidden cameras and microphones. A federal prosecutor had not yet approved arrests, but she agreed to monitor the meeting. We needed Grant to connect himself directly to the money, the threats, or Ethan's crash. I arrived first on Thursday night. The old warehouse had been empty for years. Dust covered the concrete floor. Dad's faded company logo was still painted on one wall. Grant arrived alone. At least, he appeared to be alone. He wore a dark suit and carried a bottle of bourbon. He smiled when he saw me. He said, "Dad would be happy we are settling this as a family." I nearly laughed. Instead, I placed a folder on a metal table. It contained a fake sale agreement prepared by Claire's attorney. Grant poured 2 drinks. I did not touch mine. He read the agreement and said my price was too high. I told him I knew about Meridian Freight, Blue Ridge Consulting, and Halcyon Trust. His eyes lifted from the page. I said I also knew Ethan had been investigating him. Grant leaned back in his chair. The warm brotherly expression disappeared. He asked what evidence I had. I said, "Enough to know Ethan was not having an affair." He smiled. He said, "That part was almost believable." Was it not? I asked whether he had planted the hotel receipt. He admitted Martin Reed arranged it after a private investigator photographed Ethan meeting Claire. They wanted me angry at Ethan. They wanted our marriage unstable, so Ethan would have no one to trust. I asked whether they had followed me to the storage unit. Grant said, "You should have signed the agreement after the funeral." I asked who cut Ethan's brake line. He stared at me. Then he said, "Accidents happen when people refuse to mind their own business." It was not a full confession, but it was close. I pushed harder. I told him Dad's original ledger had not burned. I said the medication bottle was already being tested. Grant stood so quickly his chair fell backward. He called me a liar. I said Mom had told me everything. That was the moment Martin Reed stepped from the shadows near the loading bay. He held a gun low beside his leg. Grant looked surprised. He said, "I told you to wait outside." Martin answered, "You talk too much when you are angry." I realized the trap had caught 2 men. But one of them was more dangerous than we understood. Martin walked toward me and asked where the ledger was. I said federal investigators had it. He told me not to bluff. Then Grant said, "She is not bluffing." Ethan copied everything. Martin's face tightened. He turned toward Grant and said, "You told me the storage unit was clean." Grant said he had sent someone, but Ethan had moved the important files. Their argument became fast and ugly. Years of loyalty disappeared in seconds. Grant accused Martin of keeping most of the stolen money. Martin accused Grant of being careless, greedy, and impossible to protect. Then Martin said something that silenced the room. He said, "I protected you after your father. I protected you after Ethan. I will not go to prison because you cannot control your sister." Grant looked at him. He asked, "What do you mean, after Ethan?" Martin did not answer. I understood before Grant did. Grant had approved the intimidation. He had benefited from Ethan's death. But Martin Reed had arranged the crash without telling him. I asked Martin about the mechanic. He raised the gun. He said, "Enough." Then the warehouse lights went out. Louis had cut the power. I dropped behind the metal table. A gunshot exploded through the darkness. Someone shouted. I heard running footsteps, then the crash of a body hitting the floor. Emergency lights flickered on. Martin was down near the loading bay. Louise had tackled him. The gun had slid across the concrete. Grant stood frozen beside the table. Red and blue lights flashed through the warehouse windows. Federal agents entered from both sides. For one perfect second, Grant looked at me as if he still believed I would save him. He said, "Nora, tell them this is a misunderstanding." I picked up the unsigned share agreement. Then I tore it in half. I said, "The misunderstanding was believing I would always protect you from the consequences of being yourself." They arrested Martin first. Then they placed handcuffs on Grant. As they led my brother away, my mother appeared outside the warehouse. She had followed him. Grant called to her. He said, "Mom, do something." She took one step forward. Then she stopped. For the first time in his life, no one rescued him. But the story was not finished. The next morning, Claire called me with news from the lab. The pills in Dad's bottle were exactly what she suspected. They would have increased his risk of a fatal clot. More important, Martin Reed's fingerprints were on the inside of the bottle cap. Grant had asked where Dad kept the medicine. Martin was the one who switched it. My mother had protected her son from a crime he had helped begin. But the man she trusted as the family attorney had turned theft into murder. Then Claire played me a final audio file recovered from Ethan's encrypted laptop. It was recorded the night before he died. Ethan said, "Nora, if you hear this, I need you to know I was coming home. I was going to tell you everything. I thought I could carry the danger alone. I was wrong. I wanted to protect your heart. And instead I broke it. Please do not let my last mistake become your last memory of me." I covered my mouth and listened as his voice continued. He said, "You are stronger than Grant knows, stronger than your mother allows herself to see, and stronger than I gave you credit for. Do not fight them like I did. Fight them your way. Make the truth impossible to hide." That was exactly what I planned to do. Par 5e, the arrests made the local news, but the first reports barely touched the truth. Bennett Medical Supply announced that Grant had taken leave because of a private legal matter. Martin Reed's firm called the allegations unproven. The board scheduled an emergency meeting and prepared to sell the company before the scandal damaged its value. They still thought I was the quiet sister who signed papers without reading them. I let them think that until the meeting began. My father's photograph hung behind the chairman's seat. Grant had always sat beneath it. That morning, I took his chair. My mother entered last and sat at the far end of the table. I placed copies of Dad's ledger in front of every director. Then Claire explained how Grant and Martin had moved more than $18 million through false of vendors and Halcyon Trust. The room became very quiet. I told the board the company faced criminal investigations and public humiliation. But 800 innocent employees should not lose their jobs because two men believed the business belonged to them. I proposed full cooperation with investigators, recovery of every stolen asset, and an employee ownership trust funded with shares seized from the fraud. One director asked who would lead the company. I said, "I will." Temporarily. He reminded me that I had never served as an executive. I reminded him that every experienced executive in the room had failed to notice $18 million disappearing. No one answered. My mother asked what would happen to her shares. I told her she could cooperate or fight the investigation and risk losing them. She said, "You sound like your father." I answered, "Dad kept giving Grant one more chance." I am done with chances. The vote passed 7-2. Within a week, we froze suspicious accounts, canceled false contracts, and hired an independent compliance team. Employees began telling us about decisions they had questioned, but were too afraid to report. I listened. 3 months later, Martin accepted a plea agreement. He admitted arranging Ethan's brake failure, switching Dad's medication, and paying the mechanic to leave Virginia. The mechanic was found alive in Nevada and agreed to testify. Grant fought longer. He claimed he never ordered anyone killed. Maybe that was true in the narrowest sense. But he had stolen, threatened, hidden evidence, and allowed Martin to remove anyone who stood in their way. A jury convicted him of fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction. At sentencing, Grant said he was sorry the family had been destroyed. Not that he destroyed it, only that it had been destroyed. Even in defeat, he described his choices as weather that had happened to all of us. The judge sent him to federal prison. I felt no joy as they led him away. Revenge does not always feel like fire. Sometimes it feels like a door closing softly after a long storm. My mother was not charged with Dad's death. She sold half her shares to the employee trust and used part of the money to repay company losses. Before moving to North Carolina, she came to my kitchen. She said she had confused love with rescue. Every time she saved Grant from consequences, she helped him become more dangerous. I told her I believed she loved me. I also told her love did not erase what she had done. She asked whether I would forgive her. I said, maybe. But forgiveness is not trust, and it is not access. She cried. I did not comfort her. That was not cruelty. It was my first honest boundary. 6 months after the arrests, I visited Ethan's grave. I brought a potted rosemary plant because he had used rosemary in nearly everything he cooked. I played his final recording again. He should have trusted me. He should have told me the truth. He had tried to protect me with silence and broke my heart instead. But my entire family had made the same mistake. Dad delayed the truth to protect the company. Mom buried it to protect Grant. Ethan hid it to protect me. Every lie wore the mask of love. And every lie caused more damage than the truth would have. I told Ethan the company had survived. I told him employees now owned part of it. I told him Grant and Martin could no longer hurt people from behind polished desks and friendly smiles. I forgave him for the false affair. I also admitted I still hated the weeks he let me believe I was not enough. The wind moved through the trees. There was no answer. But for the first time since his death, I did not feel abandoned. A year later, the company posted its strongest quarter in a decade. I was not a brilliant executive. I asked basic questions and hired people who understood what I did not. But I refused to reward silence. Claire became head of compliance. We restored Dad's first delivery van and placed it in our oldest warehouse beneath a plaque. It read, "A company is not the building, the money, or the family name. It is the people who choose to do the work honestly." On the 2nd anniversary of Ethan's death, the evidence office returned his wallet. Behind his driver's license, I found an old note I had written during our first year of marriage. It said, "You do not have to know how the whole story ends. You only have to be honest on the next page." Ethan had carried those words for years. I framed the note and placed it on my desk. Whenever someone brought me bad news, I looked at it and remembered what silence had cost us. People ask whether exposing my brother felt like revenge. The honest answer is yes. Part of me wanted Grant to feel the fear he had placed inside me. Part of me wanted Martin to watch his respected name collapse. But revenge alone would have been too small. If I had only destroyed them, they would still have controlled the ending. So I took every secret they used as a weapon and made it public evidence. I took the company they used as a private bank and gave part of it to the people whose work had built it. I took the weakness they saw in me and turned it into patience, preparation, and proof. They believed grief would make me easy to control. They believed love meant I would protect the family name. They were wrong. At my husband's funeral, a stranger gave me a key. I thought it opened a storage unit. It actually opened the life my family had locked me out of for years. They buried my husband beneath a lie. But I buried their power beneath the truth.